So welcome to our GreenTech workshop, which has been organized by the mechanical engineering sector of Industrial Global. First of all, let me start with a big thank you to all of those who were active in preparing this meeting. And let me thank the interpreters in advance for helping us to get through this day. I'm speaking to you from Vienna, which is the capital of Austria. Sisters and brothers, we met at our World Conference last year in Stuttgart, and nobody could imagine at the time what was going to happen. Corona has got our life firmly in its grip. It has a massive influence on our economies and on our world of labor, and it has a massive influence also on the work that is being done by our trade unions and also, of course, on our affiliates and members. The virus will be around for some time. And even when we find a medical way to deal with it, we will still have to deal with the very serious economic effects. As mechanical engineers, we realize that parts of our industry will come under pressure, primarily with all those aspects of our industry which have to do with the combustion engine. And here our industry is in crisis. But we also know that to be able to produce renewable energies, in order to be able to develop public transport, in order to have sustainable energy networks and agriculture and recycling, we need to have green technologies and machines. And we believe that there are future markets with green jobs which will be available, and that is clear to us even now. But in order to ensure that green jobs also spell decent and good jobs, we need to have trade unions. And we have to understand what changes are taking place in our sector. And we have to ask ourselves what we can learn from one another and how we're going to deal with those changes. I hope, sisters and brothers, that today's session will help us make one step in the right direction. And I'd like to say, welcome to our conference. Corona worldwide is leading to massive economic repercussions, but also social repercussions. We've got a lot of discussion issues to deal with, and I'm sure that I will take up some of the points later on, points that affect Germany and other parts of the world. We are dealing with the Green Deal. We have a statement made by the European Commission, which is based to reduce CO2 gases and other greenhouse gases in Europe. And Europe wants to be in 2050 climate neutral. And in 2030, the climate emissions will have to be reduced by 55%. That is a major undertaking. We're not talking just about a few percentage points here. We're talking about massive consequences. But it also brings opportunities which always go hand in hand with the risk. For example, risk on what's going to happen to industry and what it's going to mean for our sectors. And I'm referring obviously to mechanical engineering in Europe and in other parts of the world. As far as mechanical engineering is concerned, there are lots of opportunities. Mechanical engineering is the supplier of technology for the future per se. And the climate policy targets can only be achieved with our input. So we've got wind energy, we've got solar energy, which needed to be expanded. But we also need to be able to deal with new ways of providing heating and ventilation and provide upgrades to building heating systems. We've got to convince people that we really need to move towards a climate neutral society and economy, and they've got to accept it, not only accept it, but actually participate actively in its implementation, which means that the process has to be shaped in such a way that people take on board these targets, that they accept them, and that the industrial policies that are adopted by government are appropriate, so that in Europe, we are able to maintain prosperity and also improve prosperity levels in other parts of the world, because that is important when we talk about the question of how transformation can be socially or made socially acceptable. And IG Metall has for some time now said that this is particularly important. This is one of our core targets. In other words, transformation must go hand in hand with social, ecological, and democratic principles, and it has to be shaped by those principles. And that applies not just to Germany, but it also applies to Europe, and in the final analysis for everybody, because we need to work on this together throughout the world. Thank you.
The Industry All Global Union has an objective, strategic objective called sustainable industrial policy. Indeed, we demand a fair and just transition. And in the meanwhile, we also need to be part of the solution. So this GreenTech meeting is something quite important, particularly with the solutions proposed by the mechanical engineering. And I believe we are making an important workers' view about how we overcome, how come out of this crisis of the climate change. There is a big debate, sisters and brothers, colleagues, about the future of international production. And now in different multilateral organizations, there are ongoing debates. Okay. The trajectories for future international production. And there are some mega trends affecting international production. Indeed, climate change is one of them. And digital technology is another. And now, as the global supply chains have failed, there are different possible trajectories. And how international production will be done. What will be the reconfiguration? We want to have an industrial policy discussion at global level, and for making the voice of workers, and also transposing it to the national level debates. And then all those discussions related to climate change, related to using new technologies, digitalization, for transforming the current industries, and also for finding the new forms and the instruments and the industries, new type of industries to keep zero carbon economy are the burning issues, the hotspots at the moment in all those discussions in different multilateral organizations. And this GreenTech is an important issue for Industrial Global Union. It is an important policy search and an input to the industry, to the future of the industry. This is why your inputs are quite important. And I believe that we will have a good debate and good understanding for preparing our industries, for our jobs in better situation, considering the changing, transforming environment around us. I wish you all great success. And then I am certain that so we will have important inputs and good outcomes at the end of this meeting.
Thank you very much, Kemal, for this very detailed input to set the framework where we are working in. I will not go into details over the projections of the economic development. Kemal has mentioned already what has happened. I just want to raise your awareness about one interesting issue. We have different scenarios. If you look at this blue line here, what you see is that was the projection of the OECD at the end of 2019 with respect to the economic development in the world. Then COVID came, and the red line is what happened as a matter of fact. And now we are kind of at a crossroads, because different scenarios describe different consequences. That was the middle scenario, but these are the two different options, a upside or downside scenario. And at this moment, the upside scenario looks rather optimistic, whereas many countries are going either through the second wave of COVID or still remain in the first wave. And that means that economic outlook is quite blurry at this moment. But on the other hand, there's also one positive, if you can call it, within this catastrophic situation, one positive result where OECD remarked, well, policy has returned. Remember, over the last 40 years, neoliberal politicians all over the world have told us, well, governments have to stay out of economy, the market will do its best, and that will be for the best of consumers, of workers, etc., etc. Well, we as trade unions always have stated that this is rather the best for billionaires and capital, and not for the workers. But now also OECD has indicated, well, without the intervention of the governments, of the states, the COVID crisis would not be handled. So although the outlook in general remains uncertain, and nobody knows when and how the virus will disappear, well, except the still acting American president. He knows that it has already disappeared, but anybody else doesn't know exactly. But on the other hand, and that's what also Kemal and Wolfgang and Rainer already mentioned, policymakers today can play an important role in shaping the recovery. And that goes also for the issue that we are discussing today, the GreenTech, which is one of the future sectors where change can happen. And the virus has created an enormous pressure on companies and governments. And one thing is clear, the virus triggers a faster change than had been foreseen. So general global trends are becoming faster, are accelerating, and that's referring to remote work. I mean, what we are doing here today is remote work. That's something we would not have imagined 1 year ago. And today, all our meetings in Industrial Global Union are taking place remotely. The second part is digitalization is speeding up. It was already a trend. And insofar, I think what Rainer mentioned earlier, that we have to look into two mega trends in our sector, which is digitalization and green tech. This is here coming together. And the third one is automation is also accelerating through the COVID, because some manual work simply cannot be done due to social distancing rules and hygienic rules in production. Well, the general situation within Industrial, I will not go into details, but one thing is clear. Usually trade union networks, workshops, global networks, works councils, etc., require physical presence. We had a discussion the other week in a company network in a global, and our Australian brother there told us, look, usually we are going to the workplace, talking to our workers in order to organize them, talking to them in order to take up their needs and demands, which is not possible today. So communication is key for our work in Industrial Global Union, as for each and every affiliate. And e-communication is just part of the substitution. So we need to find new ways, and we need to keep communication up. Another mega trend which has been accelerating is social dialogue is at risk. It's not only that democracies are under threat, as we right now these days see in the United States. What we have seen in many governments, in many countries, is that these governments protect the companies, the capital, but not the people or the workers. Like here in Switzerland, where I'm living, there were companies asking for short-time work remuneration. So the taxpayer, the workers, paid for the short-time work, but at the same time, these companies were paying billions of dividends to their shareholders. And so far, you could even say the unemployed taxpayers made direct subsidies to the global billionaires for their shareholder value. And many companies try to abandon social dialogue. Just the other day, yesterday and the day before, we had a global network meeting with approximately 100 participants from one of the biggest producers of steel in the world. And we have reports from almost every country that the company, the management, tries to abandon social dialogue even where it had been at place beforehand. So everybody is claiming, well, we are busy to tackle the crisis. We cannot call together works councils, European works councils, World Union committees. We have to make decisions quick, and they use it, or many companies use it, to bypass social dialogue and to try to get rid of trade union involvement. And then this general trend in economy is downward. So what we could summarize, I don't want it to go into figures, but at least 1 year, if not even 2 years in many countries, are lost when it comes to wealth generation. And in addition, there is this mega trend that even got stronger during this crisis, that the distribution of wealth is becoming even more uneven. So social dialogue discussion has to be rebooted, and democracy is at stake. Workers need a voice. They need your voice. Industrial global unions affiliates have to be the voice of the workers in every country, and industrial global union has to be the voice on global level. I have already mentioned COVID is catalyst for change. Several analysts see COVID as a catalyst. I mentioned the return of policy. Deglobalization was mentioned by Kemal, so I will not come back to this. But there are fancy wordings for it: region for region, local for local, etc., etc. So some companies are really trying to reshape the face of globalization, and we have to be on board in order to make a stand in favor of the workers. And that's why we are here together. It is and can be and should be a catalyst for green growth. The next speaker will be far more competent in describing how this was triggered and can be triggered, because everybody knows the climate crisis is not solved by this COVID crisis, although maybe today in Delhi the air is cleaner than it has been last year. But still, the long-term changes have to be made in air traffic, in general mobility. Rainer and Kemal mentioned, and also Wolfgang made allusions to this. And energy, I mean, today, 80% of energy generation are heat generation. And the future is rather electricity than heat. And electricity generation requires clever and smart mechanical engineering. And just give you one example, one of the major mechanical engineering companies in the world, General Electric, just 2 weeks ago announced that they would fully abandon the business of providing for coal-fired power plant installations. And that's a clear signal. And if we look into other companies where they are suffering, it's coal mining equipment, etc. So there is a trend in reshaping the energy generation sector. And this is requiring also smart and clever mechanical engineering machinery. Then the European Green Deal, not New Green, New Deal, the European Green Deal, and Benjamin will speak about that in a moment. And the national legislation comes on top. So there are a lot of changes. I will not go into this, just as a reminder. In 2015, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development was adopted. And if you look into these 17 goals that are the Sustainable Development Goals that were adopted then, many of these are requiring mechanical engineering solutions when it comes to affordable and clean energy, decent work and growth, industry innovation and infrastructure, reduced inequalities. All these issues can only be achieved with mechanical engineering solutions and better technology. What is green technology? That's the developments in our field of economy are driven by sustainability, which means we are working to make it possible that future generations are able to meet their needs without compromising today's needs or the other way around. We want to meet the present needs of all people without compromising the ability of future generations. Cradle-to-cradle design is ending the cradle-to-grave design, which means products that can be fully reclaimed or fully reused or fully re-engineered in order to have a real life cycle in production. Source reduction, reducing waste and pollution. Everybody can imagine that CO2 exhaust is one of the core issues in this pattern. And so patterns of production and consumption have to be changed. And mechanical engineering, again, delivers the tools. And developing alternatives to existing technologies, may it be fossil or chemical intensive agriculture. Actually, nobody wants to eat chemicals. And insofar, it is crucial that mechanical engineering delivers technology that improves the output of agriculture. And this is also within our area, and viability in principle, creating centers of economic activity around these technologies. This is a benefit for environment, speeds up the implementation, and creates also careers that protect the planet. Kemal was referring to the job threats related to digitization. And Rainer had already mentioned, look, we need to have in mind what digitization means for future jobs, but we have to be very alerted to keep our people on board and to see also job opportunities and not only the risks. So how would we summarize? GreenTech cares for environment, but also covers science, technology, and business linked, is interconnected, is referring to the key markets. It's about energy efficiency and sustainable water management, and it is on the rise. GreenTech is one of the future technologies, especially when it is delivering tools and technology for climate protection. And it requires a rethinking and the shapes of global markets. If we talk about IT, I just read the other day, I don't know whether it's correct or not, but it's a very striking information. Today, the use of internet contributes more to the CO2 exhaust than air traffic, because air traffic has mostly come to a standstill, and we use internet far more than we have done in the past. And this, together with the classical IT use and electrical consumption, is a very, very energy consumptive technology. Car companies are searching for a way to emission-free mobility. We are not here to make the decision between fuel cell or battery driven, but one thing is clear, there has to be a different emission-free mobility, and it might be not only a replacement of the moving parts, it might be also that the system of mobility might change. And the EU countries, for example, make a gigantic green power project in the North Sea, which is part of the European Green Deal. So in future, the products from every industry are measured by their energy balance over the entire life cycle, including the gray energy, which means the energy which is put into the production when creating. GreenTech is an environmental technology, and it's key and cross-sectorial technology of all our sectors. So it's about energy generation and storage. It's about raw materials, material sourcing. It's energy efficiency in production and consuming. And it's covering all aspects of sustainable processes in the industry, trade, transportation, households, and public utility. And that's one of the reasons why we are working also very closely cross-sectorial with our brothers and sisters in the energy sector, with Diana, our director over there, and ICT electronics, Kan Matsuzaki in that sector. So Industry 4.0 and green technology are overlapping mega trends, working environment. And for mechanical engineering, this means digitalized production schemes. Industry 4.0 in mechanical engineering changes the production settings. Many companies have fancy names for it. I mean, I have been in one of these digitalized companies that is producing rotating material. They call it world-class manufacturing, but you can find every name you wish. It's all about digitization in combination with green technology. And this leads to a lower request for manual work. That is something we have to have in mind, and that's what Rainer and Wolfgang really mentioned very early. The integration, the Internet of Services, the Internet of Things, and the human beings, the interfaces, that requires a different skill or a different set of skills. So skills management becomes the core issue, because the traditional blue-collar worker, as we recruited him, or mostly him at that time, over the last 100 years, that will be less and less. So there will be merged forms of work, which is rather an integration of worker, of engineer, of maintenance technician, etc., etc. So skills management becomes a core issue in this new working environment. And CO2 neutral manufacturing and raw material sourcing, carbon-free or neutral production schemes, but at the end of the day, also carbon-free or neutral products that are going to the consumers. I just try to put together what we are striving for, and the goal has to be just transition, including workers and trade unions. We have to give workers a voice and avoid that workers just being victimized, and on top comes the COVID crisis, where we have to protect workers' rights and income in this global crisis. And if what you see here is that we need to work less manually, but the question is, what will we do instead? Will we create unemployment, or will we create less working hours? And Kemal mentioned earlier, there is some kind of trend that many governments say, oh, just increase working hours for fewer people working. But wouldn't it be better to reduce working hours and keep more people in working relations and in the production process? So these are the trends, the share between human beings and machines. And what you see, the share of manual work is going down also in the future. But at the same time, I just wanted to show this picture because that also gives some hope. I won't go into details, but according to the World Economic Forum, 85 million jobs are at risk in the next 5 to 10 years. But at the same time, 97 million jobs can be created. I will not say whether these figures are absolutely correct or not, but why I'm showing this is, I think, yes, a lot of jobs will disappear, but that is not the core reason for us to be afraid. We should rather focus on how these 97 million jobs will be created and who will be the working people there and what will be the working conditions. And insofar, I see a very, very challenging but also promising future for our work as global unions. So this is the opportunities for women, but I will not go into detail here because Claudia will speak about the trends on female participation in the new production form. I just wanted to say, well, look, this is also growing chances, including for the women in our sectors. And to summarize and come to an end, if we talk about the mechanical engineering in GreenTech, then it's one of the core demands must be make green jobs good jobs. And it will not do without massive efforts for renewables and GreenTech under several aspects. The access to affordable green energy or electricity is a question of democracy, because more and more issues you can only do with, let's say, with a smartphone or a computer or whatever. And to that end, every person needs electricity, access to electricity, affordable electricity, but over 50% of the global population don't have that. The second part is carbon reduction in energy generating is absolutely necessary to reach the climate goals. And then we have the sustainability needs, the machinery in mechanical engineering. That's the machinery that is creating the installations to generate solar, wind, and hydro power. And this leads also to the production and generation of energy, for example, electricity. The distribution and smarter grids, consumption efficiency, this requires mechanical engineering tools. So I think the core demand will be make green jobs good jobs. And I come to my last slide. What can we do as Industry All Global Union? And what are we offering you, our affiliates? And what are we asking you, our affiliates? GreenTech for Industry All Global Union is and will be a strategic activity in our sector work. And I really wish to thank Wolfgang and Rainer, who enabled us to pick this up and to keep this top on the agenda. We will have to map the challenges and opportunities for employees and for trade unions in this sector, but we will also support organizing drives in green tech industries, in mechanical engineering. We will keep an eye on the combination of green tech and digitization. We will have to keep an open eye on the consequences for jobs, qualification, future for jobs, or future of work, and the just transition. And we will try to develop new means and tools to recruiting in a changing work environment. And also, that's very important for me. And so far, I'm very happy that we have almost every region on board today. We want to support our regions and the affiliates in the regions in order to work in this segment of green technology. And sorry for those who don't like this person. I know in some areas of the world you don't even mention his name, but still I want to say there was this German philosopher named Karl Marx who said, well, everybody can read in German or English, but the best part of this is the blue part here, where a Swedish friend of mine who is the SKF trade union chairman in Gothenburg in Sweden, he said, well, if I try to translate it into today's working environment, it means the worker of the future will program a machine in the morning, talk to customers in the afternoon, and develop a new production process in the evening. This is an evolution of work. And well, the Swedish don't like the word revolution, but I would say, other than my friend Jaco, this might be a revolution of work. And dear brothers and sisters, comrades, colleagues, this was my presentation. I hope I did not speak too long, and I don't want to steal time from anybody else. So thank you very much. And with this, I hand over directly to Benjamin.
So in a nutshell, what I would like to do with you today in less than 20 minutes, I promise, Matthias, is first to briefly present what the European Green Deal is, with the key measures and some targets and instruments. Then I will try to explain why the European Green Deal represents a structural challenge for industries. And third, I will try to explain why and how the European Green Deal should be translated into an industrial strategy to fully tap the job potential related to the low carbon transition. So let's start with the Green Deal. The Green Deal has been announced and launched almost 1 year ago. It's, so to say, the flagship initiative, the main initiative of the current European emission. It's a package of measures which is quite ambitious and quite holistic at the same time. The idea is really to make the European Union as green as possible in the coming years. And as headline target, headline objective, you have climate change, and more precisely the objective of transforming the EU into the first climate neutral continent. Climate neutral continent, according to the technical definitions that you can find in the policy documents of the European Commission, means that the EU should reach zero net emission. It means that the EU should be an economy where any source of emission should be compensated by equivalent source of absorption. In other words, even though the absorption of emissions through sources, forestry, carbon capture and storage might play a role, the idea is to bring down greenhouse gas emissions as close as possible to zero by 2050. When that objective has been announced, we thought, oh, it's quite of a challenge. But no need to say that in the current context, the current pandemic and related economic downturn, the challenge is even bigger in terms of employment, in terms of investment gap, and in terms of possible impact on social inequalities. What are the headline actions of the European Green Deal? As I said, it's quite comprehensive. It goes from climate ambition to biodiversity. It's also covering issues such as zero pollution and chemicals, biodiversity, agriculture, mobility and transport, and interestingly, industrial strategy, industrial policy is seen as part of that package, meaning that industrial policy is seen as an element of the Green Deal, as a key enabling element to deliver on the European Green Deal. Those ambitions will have to be translated into concrete and specific policy instruments. The European Commission has started already that translation process, and you can see a first list on the screen. And we, for instance, have an industrial strategy which has been published earlier this year. We have a European climate law which is currently under discussion, an EU renovation wave which targets the building stock, and the idea is to really catalyze and accelerate the pace of the building stock refurbishment to try to put that sector in line with the 2050 target. Now, why is the European Green Deal a structural challenge for the industry? To illustrate my point, I will mainly focus on the climate aspect of the debate, and more precisely on the interim target for 2030. As I told you, the EU committed to reach climate neutrality by 2050. But to be able to reach that goal, to be on track to reach that objective, the EU has to ensure that the intermediate milestones are in line with that objective. And unfortunately, the European Commission itself had to acknowledge that the current policies in place and the current targets in place for 2030 were not ambitious enough for the EU to be on track to reach climate neutrality by 2050. As a result, the European Commission has proposed in September to step up the EU 2030 climate ambition from the current objective of minus 40% compared to 1990 level to at least minus 55%. It might look just a simple change, marginal change in figures, but actually, as Wolfgang Lemm already said, it's a quite ambitious change. As you can see on the graph on the right hand of the slide, the EU, according to official estimates, the EU is currently not on track to reach the minus 40% target by 2030, which is, again, the current official EU objective. The green line presents you the emission pathway related to existing policies, and the yellow line represents the emission pathway expected if member states put in place and implement all the new measures that have been announced in their national and climate plans during 2018. So at this stage, EU is not on track to reach the minus 40% by 2030. And in that context, the EU has decided to move to at least, the EU is currently discussing to move to at least minus 55%. It would be quite a spectacular jump, which would require additional measures and a deep revision of existing climate policy instruments. And this has to happen, again, in a context of an unprecedented economic downturn. To try to put some figures again, I made my own calculations based on official data that are available today. If you look at what the EU has already achieved between 1990 and 2018, you will see that on average, the EU has been reducing its emission by 36 megatons of CO2 equivalents per annum, per year. To reach the minus 40% target by 2030, between 2018 and 2030, the EU should reduce its emission by a little bit less than 80 megaton of CO2 equivalent per year. But to reach the minus 45%, that yearly objective should be brought to a little bit more than 140 megatons of CO2 equivalent every year. We can discuss whether those precise figures are fully accurate or not. It might depend on the number of gas you take into account. It might depend on whether or not you include emissions related to land use and land use change and forestry. But it gives you an order of magnitude of what moving the 2030 target to minus 55% means. It means almost doubling the yearly emission reductions to be achieved compared to the minus 40% scenario. It means roughly tripling the yearly emission reductions compared to what the EU achieved from 1990 to 2018. Moving to 55% also means a quick and deep structural change for industry. It's not only a matter of a general intensification of the pace of decarbonization. It's also a structural change for the industry. First, because if you look into sectoral figures, you will see that the intensification of decarbonization is particularly high in industries. I will show you some tables just after that slide, but this is the first reason why moving to 55% means a structural challenge for the industry. Then you, of course, have the employment dimension. If you look at macroeconomic level, the modeling used by the European Commission in its impact assessment show that at macroeconomic level, the impact is not significant on employment. But again, if you disaggregate by sectors, you realize that the impact might be great, especially in sectors, of course, depending on fossil fuels, but sectors that are also often highly concentrated from a regional perspective. It means that at macroeconomic level for the EU as a whole, those changes are almost invisible, but in some regions, highly depending on fossil fuel related activities, those changes might be quite significant and quite disruptive if not properly managed. The third reason why moving to 55% represents quite of a challenge is because of the investment challenge. We already knew that there was an investment gap in the EU to reach the minus 40% in 2030, an investment gap equivalent to 336 billion of additional investment per year in the EU, something equivalent to 2.3% of the GDP is to be invested every year in the energy system to reach the minus 40%. If we move to 55%, it's this investment gap is equivalent to more than 438 billion. This is equivalent to 2.7 and 3% of the EU GDP. So in a nutshell, moving to 55% by 2030 means a dramatic acceleration of the pace of decarbonization, especially in energy-intensive industries and fossil fuel-related industries. It means a deep impact on employment on those sectors, and it means also an increase of the investment challenge. if you look deeper, and I will go quick on those figures because I don't want to bomb you with too technical figures, but the European Commission proposal to change the 2030 target is accompanied by an impact assessment based on different scenarios, combining different policy options. And if you look at the scenario which offers the highest chance to reach the minus 55%, this is the mixed scenario in the middle of the table. And you can see that it implies emission reduction of 67.5%, for instance, for the supply side of energy, minus 70% of emission reduction for the power generation, minus 22% for industry, etc., etc. So quite intense increase of the emission reduction efforts for those sectors. In terms of in terms of employment, I have to play with the different windows that are opened on my screen to see my presentation. But if you look at the minus 55% scenario, in a scenario of fragmented action, meaning that all countries in the world will not move at the same pace regarding decarbonization, which I think is the most probable scenario for the next decade. You can see that the impact on employment in coal, oil and gas, and is quite significant. It's more difficult to identify the employment impact in the industrial sectors, but you can see that the trend is slightly negative for the basic industries. And for the other industries, which might be exposed to structural change, not that the jobs will vanish, as Matthias said, but those sectors will be confronted to significant changes in technologies, in markets, in consumer patterns, etc. Those sectors are not even mentioned in the impact assessment. You do not find the word automotive industry, car industry, aerospace, shipbuilding. All those sectors are not considered in the current impact assessment from the European Commission. This is, by the way, something we are deploring quite much at this stage. Now I will, in terms of investment, and just a table that you can read after the presentation, but which confirms how deep is the investment gap and how deep it is, especially for sectors related to energy production and transport. To finish my presentation, I still have 5 minutes. Let's see how we could translate the Green Deal objectives into an industrial strategy to allow us to fully use the job potential. First, we obviously need to go beyond the target and market mantra, which has been leading the EU and which is still leading many EU policy makers at the moment. If you look at the debate at the Parliament, the European Parliament has voted in favor of an objective of minus 60% of emission reduction by 2030. I'm not criticizing the position, but what is striking in the debate is that they only focus on the target and they do not consider the how. And as trade unions, we believe that targets and means should be discussed at the same time. And of course, in the how, it's not only about investment, it's not only about infrastructures, technology, innovation, it's also how to make the transition socially and democratically acceptable for all, for the society. And more precisely, it's how to make that transition a positive prospect for workers, and also for workers that are in regions and in sectors where the co-benefits of the green economy will be more difficult to secure. As you can imagine, the just transition principles are kind of the guiding principles that we would like the European Union to use to translate the Green Deal into an industrial strategy. Just transition is a trade union concept. Is the trade union concept to think and shape the transition towards a low carbon economy? It's made of sustainable industrial policy to create quality jobs. It's made of measures to support workers and communities that might be impacted by decarbonization. And it's, of course, made of industrial relations, social dialogue. There is no just transition without measures that will secure strong and efficient workers' participation. By the way, I just want to publicly acknowledge how grateful I am to the work done by Brian Kohler to define and to mainstream the just transition principles. And also from a personal point of view, I have to acknowledge that Brian really helped to build my own expertise and understanding of the concept. I know that he left the organization a few weeks ago. But just wanted to say hi to Brian. What does that mean concretely at European level? I cannot go into all the details of the European policy instruments that have a link with industrial policy, but in a nutshell, again, starting with general principles, markets and market price, market-driven instruments and target will not be enough. Public authorities must steer the transition with the help of workers, with the involvement of trade unions. Policies have to pay attention to sectoral and regional specificities. Not all regions are in the same situation regarding costs and benefits of decarbonization. We need push measures to accelerate the rollout of the technologies and the infrastructures that are needed to decarbonize the European industries. We have a series of means and resources available at European level, within the European level, within the European budget, at member states level as well. And we also have a series of industrial policy instruments which help to build cross countries, cross boundaries, industry alliances to share resources, to pool resources, to catalyze the development and the rollout of key strategic value chains. And we have examples in batteries, hydrogen, low carbon technologies for energy intensive industries or raw materials. I can dive into deeper into the substance if needed. We also need a series of pull measures to ensure that there will be a market for those products that are expected to be at least in the short term much expensive than what is currently produced through traditional means. There is a quite interesting report on that aspect which has been published last week by Agora Energiewende. And which shows that those breakthrough technologies used to decarbonize energy-intensive industries might lead to products 140% more expensive than what is produced through, I would say, conventional industrial processes. We also need a series of trade-related measures precisely to level the playing field between domestic producers and their competitors. We need, of course, to bridge the investment gap, because the climate ambition gap is also, and maybe first and foremost, an investment gap as well. There are a series of means that could be contemplated to bridge that gap, from flexibility regarding state aids and competition law in order to allow governments to play a more active role in that game as well. The EU recovery strategy and the related recovery plans might be used for that purpose as well. We have new and extra money that will be available in the coming years in the context of the EU recovery strategy. And possibly new own resources that might be generated through new fiscal means. And of course, we believe that tax evasion, tax fraud might be a good source also of additional resources. They have been depriving public authorities from financial resources that would have been really helpful to accelerate the pace of decarbonization, to better invest in infrastructures, in technologies, etc. And last but not least, companies have also a crucial role to play. It's clear that this financial support cannot be a blank check. It cannot lead to unacceptable windfall profits. And I think that it was Matthias who mentioned that debate, the debate about dividend policies of those companies might be part of the menu as well. I will not go into all the details, but as already said several times, to ensure that no one is left behind, that policy must be backed by a strong just transition policy at EU level. Some progress have been made during the recent years at the EU level. We now have a mechanism, we now have a fund, but we consider that the resources currently available are not at scale with the challenges ahead of us. And to conclude and to be absolutely clear, decarbonization is not something to be discussed. It's not an option. It's something that must be done. There is no job on that planet. Paris Agreement, IPCC reports are crystal clear. We have to reduce as much as possible our emissions and to do that as quickly as possible to avoid a global catastrophe. The European Green Deal is the EU policy framework to deliver on climate change and other sustainability issues. We don't know yet whether it would be a blueprint for just transition, to answer the question that Matthias shared with me in preparing this conference. We can see that there are a series of positive developments in terms of industrial policy, in terms of just transition principles that might allow us to create and to fully exploit opportunities ahead of us to create green jobs in renewables, in a series of other sectors. But let's be clear, this is not automatic. This will not be automatic. We need to ensure that the right industrial policy framework will be put in place. And this is our role as trade unions to fight for that. And this is our role as industrial Europe to fight for that and to make pressure on the EU policymakers. And this is something we are working on with our affiliates, as you can imagine. This is in a nutshell what I can say at this stage about the European Green Deal and how we see it as industrial Europe. And thank you for your attention, and I'm of course ready to answer any question you might have or to listen to any remarks, suggestion or comment you might make. Thank you.
I think we need just to visualize this, and Benjamin made the point. This core issue when we discuss this in the European context is that we want to think of both aspects at the same time. So you've got the overarching aim with the European Green Deal, with all the necessary targets and objectives, and at the same time, the necessity to have measures and to find those measures to implement that deal. But the second set of subjects which have also to be addressed is European industrial strategy. And therefore, that also means what kind of policy we want in European industry and what kind of future investments are needed in order to finance that policy and to implement some structure which allows us to add value to create something that is future-oriented in the European Union. And that can only be done if we combine all these issues and think in a holistic approach. So I think that we've got to have a two-pronged approach. We've got to make a step towards climate neutrality over the next few years, but at the same time, we need to have steps to maintain the industrial substance and the industrial fabric of our countries. And that goes hand in hand with our demand that the social situation also be addressed and to improve the social situation of people in Europe. So I think that these are two core issues which need to be combined with one another, and we need to develop them in parallel. Perhaps I just wanted to add that in addition to what Benjamin was saying. Thank you, Matthias.
I'm glad that we have the women's perspective on this important matter, here. And Claudia, you have the floor.
I'd like to give you the women's perspective, and more specifically, the perspective where we have with regard to changes in the world of labor. And I don't want to go necessarily into the GreenTech specifically, but I'd like to deal with some of the general issues, because GreenTech also has to be associated with digitalization and transformation of new technologies and jobs in these areas. And therefore, it is important that we also address these issues from a gender perspective as well, because it is not something that is gender neutral. So I will go into those aspects. What do we mean when we talk about transformation? What can we say about these issues? Does this mean that transformation is good for women, that there are only advantages? Now, obviously, lots of things are going to change, but digital and green technologies are going to affect all our activities and in all our lives. And as a result of this, industry and industrial sectors change, and so do industrial jobs. So I'm going to make this presentation, and I'll start with the observation that it is not a gender neutral process. And we also need to look at what the impact this has, what this process has on women. But there is also a possibility for new jobs to emerge, and there are new opportunities that will be available. We've got to look at and see what is going to be needed in order to allow women to be able to adapt to this new world of work. And what needs to be done from a trade union perspective, or rather, what should the trade unions be doing in order to create the necessary framework so that women are able to become gainfully employed and exercise an activity? It is always the women who end up having to work in the low-skilled jobs or skills which are easily made obsolete. Many jobs, many activities will disappear, and so many women will be affected by that transformation. And we need to act or provide a countervailing force so that women don't just end up joining the unemployment queue. Information and communication technology, ICT, is an important area because this is an area where many processes which affect industrial production. And in the services industry, for example, there are a lot of changes taking place. A lot of digital changes taking place also in the care sector. And I think that that is very important, in particular for the future. There is a gender gap in the ICT sector. It is a sector which is heavily dominated by men. Why? Because a lot of qualifications, a lot of training programs are targeting men. And that is particularly true for the jobs of engineers, IT engineers, computer programmers, consultants, marketing, sales, law. These are sectors which have a dominance of men. And these are often sectors providing better paid jobs, but we've got to make sure that the gender gap doesn't get larger, but on the contrary, that we manage to close that gap somewhat. So where are the opportunities for women here? I think it is important that women should be able to have access to further training programs so that they can acquire new qualifications, so that they can have access to upskilling activities. And as a result, they can improve their income opportunities, but they can also ensure that they are independent in terms of pension entitlements, and they need also to ensure that they have access to economic independence. Now, if all these criteria are fulfilled, and if women can take advantage of these new opportunities, then women will end up having an opportunity for a better life. What women need, what is necessary in order to ensure that women are able to take advantage of jobs that will emerge in this industrial sector? Obviously, I think it is very important that women have the right to professional vocational training throughout their working lives. And that should be irrespective of their age and their type of employment contract, because particularly women suffer quite a high level of discrimination, particularly as they get older. And it also affects part-time workers, so there should be no age discrimination. And women should be given the same access to part-time work. Because of the poor conditions in part-time work, it tends to be the focus of women's activities. And we need to make sure that part-time work is an area where women have the same opportunities to further training as people in full-time employment have. We also need to ensure that curricula, studies, and careers are open to women or promoted to attract women. It is important that girls be targeted so that they are given opportunities to get an education in mathematics, computer sciences, natural sciences, and technology. In other words, the MINT subjects. I think that this is going to be a key to access to technical activities. Of course, it is also important that we get rid of obstacles so that women can get access to the labor market after training in the MINT subjects. Now, this is important that women be given the same opportunities as men have so that there is no discrimination. In many areas, in many countries, we have observed that in many cases, women, quite simply, in spite of a good education or good training, are often paid less. A lot of women simply don't have the circumstance or the conditions available because they have to also look after their children. But I think it is important also that women be given the same type of jobs and that they're not discriminated when they do the same kind of jobs as men. I was talking about pay and pay discrimination a moment again. The same work should give people the same pay, equal pay, equal pay. Elimination of the gender pay gap is what we're demanding. We want to ensure that people have the same access to different pay grades. Because women also have the main responsibility for looking after children or family members at home, it is important that we need to ensure that there is a correct framework created to allow them to get a better work-life balance. So working hours is a very important target for activity so that people can engage in a professional activity. And the gap between paid and unpaid work, that needs to be addressed. Of course, that might mean reducing working hours, but in any case, I think that for women in part-time work, people should be able to live off that part-time employment or come close to being able to meet all their needs. And as for younger women, it is very important that childcare be provided during and after training, so that women can stay on in the labor market and not leave the labor market to look after children. What is the role and activities that need to be undertaken by trade unions? I think it is particularly important that our collective bargaining policy is adapted. We need to ensure that legal provisions are put in place so that the digitization process doesn't take place at the expense of women. This can be done through collective bargaining. This can be done on the basis of company agreements. And I think that what is very important is that we have a possibility opened up to women so that they do not have to face forms of discrimination. This means determining how different job categories and digital activities are actually classified and established in collective agreements and in employment contracts. And in order to achieve this, the trade unions will need to address all these issues so that new careers and new job opportunities are taken into consideration and that they become the subject of negotiations with employers, and that pay negotiations can take place at that level. Access to further training programs is also an essential point, as I've said earlier on, because we want to be able to protect women from unemployment. Another important area for trade union activity is in the field of teleworking. Now, telework affects women specifically. I think it is a very critical area which really needs to be analyzed carefully, because we simply cannot accept a situation where women are discriminated against simply because they have to work from home, because they have to do remote working, and that they don't have anybody to help them look after the children. So conditions have to be established and put in place with regard to working time, and also so that there is a clear delimitation between professional activities and private life. We wanted to have jobs that are created which simply cannot be carried out by women because they have to look after children at the same time. You cannot have people being expected to work around the clock, as it were. So you've got to have a clear delimitation between work and private life. Then there is the question of industrial democracy and employee participation. When women are required to do remote working, what does this mean in terms of their career prospects? How can we secure better pay opportunities? And you cannot have a situation where career opportunities are not provided to women. I think that employers have a big role to play in ensuring that women are protected and that employee protection is taken into account in all the activities undertaken by the trade unions. The gender pay gap is another important area. Equal pay for work of equivalent value or for the same activity. Reducing working hours is important, not just between or in the gap between private life and working life, but perhaps we should also be looking at a reduction in working hours without any loss of pay, because this is a very important aspect. We cannot accept a situation that women earn less because working hours are reduced. So when working hours are reduced, we're asking that there is no attendant reduction in pay. Then what about the transformation and its impact on women? I think that we have quite a lot of documentation, but there are too few studies that have been carried out. We've got to see how the transformation is actually affecting women and women's jobs. I think it would be very useful, therefore, if studies could be commissioned by the trade unions to see how that transformation is impacting women. What opportunities are being developed? What is the use of these transformations for women? So I think that we need to have a solid set of data in order to be able to tailor our measures correctly. And then there are women's jobs during the COVID-19 crisis. I think that during this crisis, we need to see what is happening throughout the world. Women tend to be impacted by the COVID more than men throughout the world. Why? Because they've got to care for children, because public institutions are closed, by the fact care structures are no longer providing services. And women are being forced primarily back into the home, and therefore have very little possibility in order to look after their own economic survival. So we've got to make sure that when measures are taken, and when we talk about measures, we're talking about the economic stimulus packages that will be adopted once the crisis is over, that those packages are designed in such a way that men and women can benefit equally. And again, this is important so that women are not disadvantaged, and in order to allow women in future also to find a good job, and to be able to ensure their very existence. Another final point for women, when we talk about securing our own existence, our position in the world of labor, I think a focus must be for Industrial Global to develop campaigns. In fact, we've had campaigns for many years, and we've got to continue those campaigns against violence against women. Women need work in order to have equal opportunities and in order to have decent pay, but they also have a right to a life without violence, because this is the only way we can ensure that people can have a discrimination-free life. This is something that we as trade unionists must never lose sight of. Women must have the same rights and the same opportunities. Thank you. From my perspective, the current situation is very well described. And I think that this is a very good development. It's a very good basis for us to do future work. What are the main principles of this position paper? The Corona crisis is something which affects us very, very strongly. And I think that green technology is going to provide an enormous impetus to our sector. I think it will provide a big contribution to development by developing new technologies and by creating new machines and tools which allow us to create clean energy. And by having sustainable products which can be produced with this energy, we are going to see new types of jobs that will be created. And these could be very profitable. And I think that as trade unionists and members of Works Council, we need to make sure that green jobs are transformed into good jobs, that our needs are heard, that nobody is left by the side, that people are actually included in all these processes. And this can't be done just by imposing things. It also involves solidarity. It involves working together. If we want to have a lot of members, if we can bring all these people into the union, if we are strong in terms of our membership, then that will strengthen the unions, and then we'll be able to implement our ideas. And that is obviously what our goal is. I think that you've got a number of conclusions which are set out in the position paper. And I think that we will continue to remain in contact. We will continue to discuss amongst ourselves. And I think that we need to put a focus on organizing, that is to say, trade union organizing work and recruiting people into the trade unions, especially young women. I think we've seen that in spite of the virus, which has kept us apart and which is a plague on our lives, nevertheless, we've been able to remain active. We've been able to continue to organize our meetings. I think that that was a really wonderful achievement, and I'd like to thank you all for that. We have a declaration which covers many, many, many issues, and I think we've established a good basis for our work going forward. Sisters and brothers, I wanted to say thank you very much to you all. Thank you very much for your participation. Thank you very much for the great ideas that you've injected in the discussions. Please stay healthy.